The void stretched endlessly, a vast and silent graveyard of forgotten battles and ancient wrecks. Stars shimmered in the distance, cold and indifferent, bearing silent witness to the passage of time. The Zalari Dominion's patrol fleet cruised through this forsaken sector, its presence a mere formality. Nothing had threatened their dominion in centuries. Nothing had challenged their rule. Yet tonight, the silence was broken. High Strategist Varun Kai sat in his command throne aboard Vorthon's edge, his taloned fingers drumming idly against the metallic surface of his armrest. His eyes, dark and calculating, remained locked on the glowing tactical display before him. The information fed to him was minimal, too minimal. A ship had been detected in the void, large and unresponsive, floating like a corpse abandoned in deep space. At first, his officers assumed it was another derelict, a casualty of some forgotten skirmish, left to drift among the stars until it was consumed by time. But the readings told a different story. The ship was ancient, its hull scarred by untold battles. It had clearly suffered, endured, and yet it remained intact and, more disturbingly, active. Weak energy signatures pulsed from its core, flickering like embers refusing to die. Varun Kai's chief archivist, Yaris, hunched over her console, her long fingers gliding across the interface as she tried to decode the anomaly before them. The tension in her posture betrayed her unease. "The vessel's design does not match any known configurations within our records," she reported, her voice measured but laced with uncertainty. "It does not belong to any active faction, nor does it correlate with any of the extinct empires we have catalogued." That caught Varun Kai's attention. The Dominion kept meticulous records of every species that had risen and fallen within their reach. A warship of this size and structure should not exist outside their knowledge. The fact that it did meant one of two things. Either the Dominion's historians had failed, or this ship had deliberately remained hidden. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, their rigid postures betraying a creeping sense of dread. They were explorers, soldiers, conquerors, but something about this derelict, this nameless, lifeless husk, felt unnatural. Varun Kai exhaled slowly, choosing his words with care. "Life signs?" Yarius hesitated. "None," she finally said, but the way she said it sent a ripple of unease through the bridge. There was something strange about the way the sensors struggled to report. The ship was neither truly dead nor truly alive. An anomaly. And anomalies were dangerous. The High Strategist leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Deploy 2 scout ships, Seraph 1 and Seraph 2. Approach with caution. I want a full assessment of that vessel before we move any closer." 2 sleek Zalari scout ships detached from the fleet, their engines burning with controlled precision, as they glided toward the derelict warship. 100 kilometers out, they activated their scanners, sweeping the ship's surface with high-resolution imaging. Then the universe changed. Without warning, every console aboard Vorthon's edge flickered. Violently, the ship's holographic displays glitched, twisting into static-laden distortions. A deep, unnatural hum vibrated through the dreadnought's hull, resonating with something beyond the physical. An alarm blared across the bridge. "The derelict is powering up," Yarius shouted, her voice barely cutting through the chaos. Multiple energy sources coming online. Reactor systems, sensor arrays, weapons. Varun Kai rose from his throne, his muscles coiling in response to the sudden shift in atmosphere. "That ship is centuries old," he growled. "It should not have the capability to reactivate this quickly." But it was. The once-dead warship was stirring, like a beast awakening from slumber. Deep within its armored hull, forgotten systems reignited, flooding dead corridors with artificial light. Automated repair drones, dormant for an age, skittered through the skeletal remains of the vessel, restoring its fractured systems with terrifying efficiency. A pulse rippled outward from the derelict, an electromagnetic shockwave, brief but potent. For the smallest fraction of a second, the void itself seemed to tremble. Then, silence. A new symbol emerged on the tactical display, flickering into existence with a clarity that sent a chill through the room. 3 interlocking rings, faded and scorched by time but still unmistakable. the mark of an empire thought lost to history. Varunkai's throat tightened. He had seen that symbol before, buried in the oldest war records of the Dominion. It had been a warning, an echo of a species, so violent, so tenacious, that their very existence had been deemed a threat to the balance of the galaxy, humanity. But humans were gone, wiped out, erased. Their worlds lay in ruins, their fleets long since reduced to drifting wreckage. And yet, standing before them in the void was a warship that bore their mark. A warship that should not exist. A transmission erupted from the derelict. The voice that followed was deep, distorted by time and static. But there was no mistaking the message. We remember. Varunkai's claws tightened against the metal of his armrest, and for the first time in many years, fear crept into his veins. This was no derelict. This was a ghost. The void surrounding the ancient warship seemed to pulse with unseen energy, a ripple in the fabric of deep space. Every sensor aboard Vorthon's Edge struggled to keep up with the sudden surge of data pouring from the derelict. Anomalous power spikes, erratic gravitational shifts, radiation signatures that defied expected decay rates. It was as if the ship were emerging from a long, death-like slumber, stretching its limbs after an eternity of stillness. Varunkai remained frozen for a moment, his mind racing through centuries of history, battle records, and whispered legends. Humans had been exterminated. Their colonies turned to dust, their fleets hunted to extinction. The war had ended with fire and silence, and yet, standing before him, a remnant remained. A remnant that was very much alive. "Bring the fleet to high alert," he commanded, his voice razor-sharp. "I want every available scan directed at that vessel. Now." Yarisa's hands moved quickly over her console, her eyes flickering between the erratic data streams. "High Strategist, this is impossible." Her voice wavered as she continued. "The ship's system should be degraded, obsolete, and yet, its power levels are stabilizing. More than stabilizing. They're increasing." The ship's hull, once dark and lifeless, now shimmered under the fleet's lights. Plates of worn metal were rearranging, sealing long-dead fractures as automated repair systems hummed to life. Dull scars of past battles glowed faintly as internal heat signatures surged. The vessel was not just operational, it was healing. Varunkai felt the weight of something far greater than himself settling upon his shoulders. This ship, no, this entity, was more than a relic. It had endured the passage of time in silence, waiting, watching, and now something had woken it. "High Strategist!" one of the sensor officers called out, his normally disciplined tone cracking under pressure. "The ship is scanning us!" A chill ran through the command deck. This was not standard protocol for an automated system reboot. The warship wasn't simply coming back online. It was assessing its surroundings, calculating, learning. It was aware. Aboard Seraph 1 and Seraph 2, the Zalari scout pilots adjusted their flight paths, maintaining a cautious distance. They were trained for high-risk encounters, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for a warship that could seemingly think for itself. "Command, this is Seraph 1, one of the pilots reported. "We are maintaining safe distance, but the vessel has locked onto us. No weapons fire yet, but it knows we're here." Varunkai's mandibles tightened. "Withdraw. Now." The scouts turned sharply, engines burning hard to put distance between themselves and the anomaly. It was too late. Without warning, the derelict shifted. It was subtle, no sudden lurch, no reckless burst of thrusters, but a calculated movement, an undeniable display of intent. A flickering blue glow ignited, deep within its reactor core, illuminating the massive bulk of its frame. Then, in the span of a heartbeat, its engines roared to life. An energy wave rippled outward, sweeping across the void like the first breath of a sleeping giant. The ancient warship, long thought dead, surged forward with terrifying speed. Varunkai's eyes widened as the readings updated. "That ship is maneuvering." The bridge fell into chaos. Zalari officers scrambled to update their calculations. The velocity was impossible. Engines of that era should have been inefficient, sluggish, prone to failure. And yet, this warship moved with unnatural grace, adjusting its trajectory in precise, deliberate increments. It wasn't just moving. It was hunting. High strategist. We have a full identification on the vessel. Yaris's voice was barely above a whisper. Designation: Leviathan. Human origin. A name pulled from the ashes of history, from a time when humanity still existed as a force of war and destruction. The Leviathan had been presumed destroyed, like the rest of its kind. Its fleet had vanished without a trace, its fate unknown, until now. The bridge remained deathly silent as the implications settled over them like a suffocating fog. And then, a new transmission came through. Unlike the first, which had been broken and distorted, this one was clear. A deep, artificial voice, cold and deliberate. This war is not over. The transmission hung in the air like a specter, its weight pressing down on every officer aboard Vorthon's edge. The voice was deep, synthetic, yet unmistakably human. It carried no emotion, no hesitation, only cold certainty. The war is not over. The words echoed in Varunkai's mind, unraveling centuries of belief in an instant. Yaris was the first to break the silence, her fingers trembling as she sifted through the data flooding in from the scanners. High strategist. This ship's systems are unlike anything we have on record. Its reactor core is producing energy levels comparable to a modern dreadnought, yet the technology predates anything in our databases. Its hull is regenerating at an accelerating rate. It's adapting. Varunkai barely heard her. His gaze remained locked on the massive warship now moving with terrifying precision through the void. The Leviathan was no crude relic, no drifting corpse of a long-dead species. It was alive. It was learning. And it was dangerous. The bridge's main display flared red as a new alert blared through the ship's internal systems. The Leviathan had fully activated its targeting array. Every Zalari vessel in the patrol fleet was now marked. Aboard Seraph 1 and Seraph 2, the pilots fought to maintain formation as the gravitational field around the warship began to shift. Their instruments flickered wildly, struggling to compensate for the fluctuations. Space itself seemed to bend around the Leviathan in ways that defied logic. "This thing is manipulating gravity," one of the scout pilots reported, his voice edged with barely contained panic. "I don't know how, but our engines are straining just to stay level." Varunkai's mind raced. Gravity manipulation was not an unknown technology, but to achieve this level of precision on a vessel of such age, it should have been impossible. It was as though the ship had been designed to evolve, to refine its systems in real time. "Get those scouts out of there," he ordered. "Now." But the Leviathan had already decided its next move. In a single fluid motion, the warship adjusted its trajectory and released an energy pulse unlike anything the Zalari had encountered before. It was not a weapon in the conventional sense. No missile, no laser fire. Instead, it was an electromagnetic burst laced with something deeper, something ancient. The wave washed over the Zalari fleet, bypassing their shields effortlessly. Every display aboard Vorthon's edge went black. The hum of energy that normally resonated through the dreadnought fell silent. Across the fleet, engines sputtered, weapons deactivated, and for a single moment, the Dominion's forces were left completely blind. Then the ship spoke again. "You should not have come here." The voice was different this time. It was not the cold, artificial tone of an automated system. It was deeper, layered, almost as if multiple voices were speaking at once. It was human, but more than human. A presence, an intelligence that had existed long beyond what should have been possible. As the power flickered back on, Varunkai clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain composed. This was no ordinary war machine. It was something far worse. The humans had been a species known for their tenacity, for their ability to survive against impossible odds. And if this ship was any indication, they had not merely died out. They had adapted. "High strategist," Yarius whispered, her voice laced with something dangerously close to fear. "I don't think this ship is just reacting to us. I think it's remembering." The thought sent a chill through Varunkai's spine. The Leviathan had been silent for centuries, a ghost lost in the depths of space. But now, faced with the Zalari once more, it was awakening not as a relic, but as something reborn. And it remembered its enemy. The Leviathan moved with an intelligence that defied understanding, a specter of war reborn from the ashes of annihilation. Every system aboard Vorthon's Edge struggled to keep up, cycling through interference as the warship's energy signature pulsed through the void like the heartbeat of something impossibly old and impossibly aware. The Zalari fleet, once a symbol of dominion and control, now found itself frozen, watching as the impossible unfolded before them. Varun Kai felt the weight of history pressing against his chest, his mind reeling with the implications. The humans had been wiped out. Entire fleets had been reduced to molten slag, their colonies razed until nothing but scorched ruins remained. The Zalari had ensured that no remnants of their civilization remained intact. And yet, here stood the Leviathan, its hull reforging itself in real time, its systems adapting, its mind, if it had one, reawakening to a universe that had long since written it off as extinct. The war was not over. High strategist, Euresa's voice cut through the heavy silence, her normally calm demeanor fraying at the edges. The Leviathan is interfacing with our systems. It's sifting through our database. She swallowed. It's looking for something. Varun Kai's claws dug into the armrest of his throne. Shut down all external links. Do not let it access. The main display flickered again, lines of distorted data rushing across the screen in an unreadable blur. For a moment, a symbol appeared. 3 interlocking rings, the same insignia burned into the warship's hull. Then, a flood of archived footage filled the display. The Zalari bridge crew watched in stunned silence as their own history unfolded before them. It was war footage, recorded through the lenses of forgotten battles. Zalari warships descending upon human colonies. Orbital bombardments turning lush, thriving worlds into barren, glassed wastelands. Cities crumbling under relentless firepower. Desperate human fleets making their final stands against overwhelming Zalari numbers. It was history told not from the conqueror's perspective, but from the eyes of the doomed. But there was something more. The footage was not just an archive of events. It was curated, selected, chosen. The Leviathan was not simply reviewing history. It was remembering its own past. The image shifted again, this time focusing on a single battle, one that even Varun Kai recognized instantly. The fall of Sol. The final engagement that had sealed humanity's fate. The Zalari had thrown their entire fleet into that war, their dreadnoughts and battlecruisers surrounding Earth like a pack of predators closing in for the kill. Humanity had fought, as they always had, but their numbers had dwindled, their ships burning and breaking under the relentless assault. And then, as the battle neared its end, something had happened. A single human warship had vanished from the battlefield. No wreckage had been found, no escape pods, no distress beacons. It had simply disappeared. A mystery, left unsolved, until now. The Leviathan had not fled. It had hidden. It had gone dark, drifting beyond the reach of Zalari sensors, beyond the reach of time itself. It had waited. It had endured. And now, it had returned. The ship's voice emerged once more, colder, more defined than before. You took everything. The words carried the weight of centuries, spoken not with anger, but with something far worse. Understanding. The Leviathan knew what had been done to its kind. It had seen the extermination, recorded it, stored it deep within its very core. And now, as it stood once more among the stars, it did not rage. It did not threaten. It simply acknowledged. Warning siren erupted across Vorthon's Edge. Weapons were coming online aboard the Leviathan. Targeting matrices aligned, calculations ran at speeds beyond comprehension. This was not a blind, vengeful attack. This was execution. Varun Kai's breath came slow and steady. For the first time in his life, he was staring into the abyss of something he did not understand. Something his empire had deemed extinct. Something that had survived. Something that was about to fight back. The void between the Leviathan and the Zalari fleet tensed like the space before a storm, charged with an unseen but undeniable force. Every sensor aboard Vorthon's Edge screamed, warnings of an imminent engagement. yet no conventional weapons had been fired. The warship did not react like an enemy driven by rage or desperation. There was no reckless charge, no erratic surge of power. Instead, it moved with terrifying precision, each calculation executed with the patience of something that had waited far too long for this moment. Varun Kai could feel it, an unspoken certainty settling over him like the slow drag of ice through his veins. The Leviathan was not attacking out of vengeance. It was fulfilling a purpose. It had seen the end of its people, recorded their final moments, learned from their suffering. Now, it had returned, not as a relic of a fallen empire, but as something more. Yaris's voice barely masked the tremor of fear beneath it. High strategist. The warship's power output is increasing beyond projected limits. Its energy reserves should not be this stable. She paused, her mandibles tightening. I think it's evolving its systems as we speak. The thought alone was enough to shatter centuries of strategic doctrine. Ships did not evolve. They degraded, required maintenance, suffered from entropy and wear. But the Leviathan was changing in real time, rewriting the laws of what should have been possible. Then, the first strike landed. It was not a blast of plasma or a railgun slug. It was something unseen, something felt. A disruption wave spread through the Zalari fleet, invisible to the eye but devastating to anything synthetic. Every ship in its path flickered, power systems dimming, targeting computers locking up, engines sputtering, as if something had reached into their cores and stolen the very essence of their function. Aboard Seraph 1, the pilot struggled against his controls. Command, we've lost secondary systems, primary thrusters barely responding. His breathing turned sharp, panicked. This isn't an EMP. It's rewriting our ship's systems, corrupting them. The realization sent a ripple of unease through the command deck. This was not just a tactical maneuver. It was a message. The Leviathan was demonstrating its understanding of its enemy, disabling, dissecting, dismantling without a single wasted shot. Varun Kai's grip tightened on his armrest. Reroute power to countermeasures. Do not let it gain full access to our systems. The command was met with frenzied action, officers scrambling to isolate their networks, break connections, shut down external ports before the warship could reach deeper into their infrastructure. But the damage had already begun. Several smaller vessels drifted, powerless, their crews trapped in the suffocating realization that their ships were no longer entirely their own. And then, the Leviathan fired. A single projectile, compact and unassuming, launched from its forward batteries with no flash of energy, no fanfare. It moved with the inevitability of something that had already calculated the outcome. The Zalari warship Orion Spear had barely begun evasive maneuvers when the impact struck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, in an instant, the ship folded, in on itself. Not from an explosion, not from kinetic force, but from something deeper, something that reached beyond the physical. Space twisted, metal groaned, the very reality around the impact point bending as if the laws of physics had momentarily fractured. Orion Spear crumpled inward, its mass compressing, warping, vanishing into a pinprick of nothingness before the void swallowed it whole. The silence that followed was worse than any explosion. Varun Kai stared at the empty space where a Zalari warship had stood just seconds before. No debris, no wreckage, only absence. His voice came slow, measured, barely, concealing the storm beneath. What was that? Yaris's fingers trembled over her console. That was not conventional weaponry. She hesitated, swallowing hard. High strategist, the Leviathan is using something beyond our understanding. This isn't just human technology. This is something else. Varun Kai's mind raced. This warship had not merely survived. It had changed, adapted, become something no longer bound by the limitations of its creators. If the humans had built such a vessel in their final days, what had they been preparing for? The thought was interrupted by the warship's transmission, its voice now carrying something beyond cold logic. There was recognition in its tone. You learned from us. The Zalari fleet remained frozen, its formation uncertain, its weapons primed but hesitant. The voice came again, deeper, more deliberate. But you did not understand. The words carried through the void, heavier than any weapon, colder than the abyss itself. The Zalari fleet remained motionless, their formation a fractured shadow of its former discipline. The Leviathan did not move to press its attack, did not exploit their hesitation. It simply waited, its presence an immutable force, as if daring them to comprehend the weight of their own actions. Varunkai's mind raced, clawing for control over a situation that had already spiraled beyond conventional warfare. Every strategy he had ever studied, every battle doctrine ingrained into his species for millennia, all seemed irrelevant in the face of what stood before them. The Leviathan was not just an enemy, it was a consequence. A specter born from the sins of their past, a reminder that history did not forget. It merely waited for the right moment to be reborn. Urias's voice wavered, uncharacteristically uncertain. High Strategist, our fleet is requesting orders. Some captains are calling for retreat. Others, they want to open fire. Varunkai exhaled slowly, his mind working through the limited choices before him. Retreat meant acknowledging fear, a weakness the Zalari Dominion had never allowed itself to admit. To open fire meant engaging a force that had already proven it could unmake them with a single calculated strike. Both paths led to outcomes he did not control, and that alone sent an unfamiliar ripple of unease through him. The Leviathan did not wait for his decision. It acted. Without warning, the ship's outer plating began to shift, intricate layers of its hull reconfiguring in an organic fluid motion. The very material of the vessel was not metal, not in the way the Zalari understood. It was something alive, something that restructured itself with intent. Energy coursed through its surface in glowing veins of unfathomable power, and with each pulse, the warship's design became less a relic of the past and more an entity of the present. Then, from the depths of the ship, a signal rippled outward. Not an attack, not a transmission of words, but something deeper. It was a pulse of raw data, a cascade of unreadable information flooding the Zalari systems before they had a chance to react. Every screen aboard Vorthon's edge flickered, filled with strings of ancient human code, fractured battle logs, fragmented distress signals, corrupted transmissions from the final days of the war. But beneath the static, beneath the distortion, there was something else, a single repeating message. We are still here. The words carried a weight that sent a shudder through the bridge crew. The Zalari had destroyed humanity. They had erased their worlds, burned their cities, crushed their fleets. Yet the message remained. Not in defiance, not in desperation, but in absolute certainty. Before Varunkai could respond, a new alert blared across the fleet. The Leviathan was powering its weapons again, but this time it was different. It was not a singular, targeted strike. It was something far more methodical, more deliberate. Across the battlefield, gravity wells began to shift, localized distortions forming around Zalari vessels. The ships caught within them struggled against unseen forces, their engines burning hot as they fought against an enemy that was not attacking them, but binding them. Aboard Seraph 2, the pilot's voice was raw with disbelief. High Strategist, we're locked in place. The warship isn't firing, it's containing us. The realization sent a pulse of understanding through Varunkai's mind. This was not an act of destruction. It was an act of control. The Leviathan was no longer reacting. It was guiding the battle to an outcome it had already foreseen, and in that moment, he understood. The warship had been waiting. It had not revealed itself to annihilate them. It had emerged to test them, to see if, after centuries of dominance, the Zalari had learned anything beyond conquest. Varunkai's voice was steady as he spoke. Cease all hostile actions. Urias turned to him, eyes wide with disbelief. High Strategist? He met her gaze with unwavering certainty. If this warship wanted us dead, we would already be gone. This is not a battle, this is a reckoning. The Leviathan remained motionless, its weapons primed but unfired, its presence unwavering. It had issued its warning. It had demonstrated its power, and now it was waiting for an answer. Varunkai took a breath, knowing that whatever came, next would decide the future of their empire. The stillness in the void felt heavier than any barrage of fire. The Zalari fleet, once the embodiment of order and domination, now hung motionless before the Leviathan, trapped not by force, but by something far more profound. A single decision stood between survival and annihilation, and for the first time, in the Empire's long history, its fate did not lie in its own hands. The warship had not struck the killing blow, but neither had it retreated. It remained, waiting, a relic of a people long thought destroyed, now returned to demand an answer that the Zalari had never considered giving. Varunkai could feel it pressing against him, that ancient weight, the judgment of the dead. The humans had not perished in weakness or cowardice. They had burned, yes, burned at the hands of the Zalari war machine, their fleets shattered, their worlds reduced to nothing but silent graveyards drifting through the dark. But they had endured in a way no one had foreseen. They had left something behind, something more than ruins and memories. They had left a warning. He inhaled slowly, steadying his mind. Every instinct, every thread of his training screamed at him to seize control, to dictate the outcome before it was dictated to him. But there was no battlefield here, no strategy left to play. There was only the weight of what had been done, and the unspoken question hanging in the air. We are still here. The words looped through his mind, not as a threat, but as a statement of absolute truth. Humanity had never truly disappeared. It had become something else, something the Zalari could neither comprehend nor predict. And now, in this moment, it was giving them a choice. His voice, when he finally spoke, was measured and deliberate. Open a channel. The bridge crew hesitated. Even Yaris, who had remained a pillar of composure through the battle, looked uncertain. High strategist, if we open the channel. A beat of silence. Then, the command was obeyed. The Zalari fleet linked its systems to the void, sending out a signal not of challenge, not of surrender, but of something infinitely more dangerous. Acknowledgement. Varun Kai straightened in his command chair, his golden war crest glinting under the cold, artificial light. He did not know if the Leviathan would understand the weight of what he was about to say. Perhaps it already knew. Perhaps it had always known. The Zalari Dominion recognizes your presence. He spoke with the full authority of his empire, yet his voice held none of its usual arrogance. There was no room for it now. We have seen your strength. We acknowledge your survival. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before finishing. And we will not forget. For a long moment, the Leviathan did not respond. Its dark, ever-shifting hull reflected the distant light of the stars, a monument to something that should have perished long ago but had refused to be erased. The silence stretched, an eternity compressed into seconds. Then, finally, the warship moved. It was not a retreat. It was not an advance. It was something beyond those concepts. The Leviathan retracted its weapons, its gravitational locks fading one by one, releasing the Zalari ships from their invisible binds. The massive vessel turned, its engines humming with an energy unlike anything the Zalari had ever encountered. And without a single word, it departed. It did not flee. It did not run. It simply left, disappearing into the void as though it had never been there at all. Varun Kai exhaled slowly, watching as the last traces of the warship's presence faded from their sensors. He had no illusions about what had just happened. This was no victory. The Zalari had not won. They had been spared. Yari's voice was quiet, almost reverent. What do we do now, High Strategist? For the first time in his life, Varun Kai did not have an immediate answer. He looked out, into the darkness where the Leviathan had vanished, knowing deep in his core that something fundamental had changed. The ghosts of the past had returned, and they had made their presence known. He turned his gaze back to the fleet, to his empire, to the vast and unknowable future stretching out before them. His claws flexed against the armrest, his mind already calculating what had to come next. We prepare, he said. The war was over, but something far greater had just begun.